My name is Tony Turner, and I'm the founder and CEO of My Voting Power Greenwich. The first thing I want to do is say thank you. Thank you to the just over 400 people that we have signed up over Zoom this evening across Senate District 36, and the 60 or some odd so people that have taken time out of their busy day to join us here tonight. So you have choices, and we really appreciate on behalf of My Voting Power Greenwich that you took the time out of your schedule. There's two other people I want to say thank you to. That's the candidates. Likewise, they could be in a lot of different places tonight, but they chose to be here to talk about their view on the issues in Senate 36 and how they will affect the lives of millennials, that is those between the ages of 18 and 35 years of age. And also a special thank you to the press and to Greenwich Sentinel for being our media sponsor. There are other press outlets here tonight being represented, so once again, you have choices. There's a lot of places that you could be, a lot of things that you could write about, and when you write about them, and we're quite grateful that you're here for that. Just a quick word about masks. Just out of an abundance of caution and in light of the recent developments with the hyper-contagious Delta variant of COVID-19, we do strongly ask that you wear a mask this evening. Just out of an abundance for caution. We can't use the word require, but we would like to ask you to do that. We do have masks right out of the bundle, so they're sanitary. If you do need a mask to wear, please do so. We would strongly ask you to help us out with that. A word about My Voting Power Greenwich. It is a nonpartisan educational organization really designed to do one thing, and that is to help millennial voters in the town of Greenwich become better informed about the political process. It's founded on really one statistic, and I found it quite alarming at the time, and that is turnout among Greenwich millennials is a full 55% lower than those of 36 years of age and greater. And when I learned that statistic, and I learned that not only did we have that statistic, but we have roughly 3,000 millennials in town that have never voted in a local election, I knew we needed to do something. So that is the genesis of My Voting Power. We've done several things throughout the year. We've done a video selection with Fred Camillo. That's online for you to look at. We have a website that will facilitate millennial voting in a lot of different ways. Excuse me. And of course, tonight, one of the things we're showcasing is the Senate 36 district debate. And again, we appreciate you guys being here. Let me dive right into the debate and talk a little about the mechanics, and then we can take it from there. First of all, the three-way debate will last for approximately 1 hour, with the objective of learning the candidates' positions on the issues as they relate to millennials and Senate District 36. It's going to be broadcast now over Channel 79 Live, and over Facebook on the Greenwich Sentinel website, and of course over Zoom. In just a few minutes, each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement, and will proceed alphabetical by last name, excuse me, with Mr. Blankley being first. And I think I may borrow Mr. Blankley's water here coming up shortly. Questions tonight are going to be in 3 sections. We're going to have questions, first of all, from our panelists that you see over here on the left, all millennials. I'm going to go out on a limb and say an average age of 23, maybe 24 years of age. They've worked very, very hard to help put this together, and very, very hard to help come up with the questions. Secondly, we'll have questions from the audience. Everyone should have been given by now a pen and an index card for your questions. If you would like to fill out the index card with questions and pass them over to the end of your row, Tulasi Sundaresh is going to be walking. Tulasi, raise your hand again, please. She'll be walking over on that side of the room to pick up your questions. You also have a QR code. And if you'd rather use the QR code on your phone to bring up a Google form to fill out questions, and the Google form will be transmitted over to Tulasi's laptop, that is an option as well. So we're heavy into technology tonight, either QR code or my way, the old-fashioned way of writing it out on an index card. And then lastly tonight, we're going to be given the opportunity of the candidates to ask each other questions. And that will be an appropriate time. The candidates can ask either one of their opponents a question or both opponents a different question. And there'll be a timed exchange of 90 seconds each to be able to answer those questions. So everything will be timed tonight. I will be, as moderator, the primary timer with our moderators asking the questions along the way as we go. Any questions from the candidates before we get started? Okay. Finally, at the end, we'll have closing remarks for 2 minutes, and any unused time will not accrue, so we want to be sure to take note of that. So let's then begin with our 1-minute opening remarks from Mr. Blankley. Mr. Blankley, 60 seconds, please.
Thank you, Tony. It is a wonderful thing that you started here, so congratulations. Thank you to the millennials here, to my two opponents, and to all of you who came out here this evening. So hello to all the millennials out there, and hello from a baby boomer. That's me. I suspect there are many baby boomers out there too listening in, and I see one or two in the audience among many of my old friends. So baby boomer used to mean young at one time. It means something not quite the same these days, but I can tell you it's difficult to believe. I was actually young once, and I had hopes and aspirations and fears, as I suspect many young people these days do. So I took a quick poll of millennials in my orbit, and it turns out there are two things that concern them most. One is something very tiny. It causes the pandemic, and the other is something very large, and that is climate change. It's a very uncertain world that young people are coming into at this time, much more uncertain than when I was your age. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blankley. Mr. Fazio, in the alphabet, you're next.
I am. Thank you, MVP, for hosting tonight's debate. Thank you to the volunteers who helped make it happen. My name is Ryan Fazio, and I am running to be your next state senator in order to create a positive change in our state government and a brighter future for everyone in our community. This district is my home. I grew up here. I've worked most of my career in renewable energy in Stamford. I volunteered in inner city schools for many years locally. I serve in the Greenwich town government on the RTM and on the First Selectman's Energy Efficiency Committee. So I feel like I know and I love this community. I know it to be the best place imaginable to build a life. But I also see that our state has been hurting for many years. We have sky-high unemployment and cost of living, rising crime, a hurting environment, and divisive politics, and an effort to take over more and more of our local prerogatives over zoning and schools. The voters of this district have the opportunity to send a message to the entire state in this election. They have the opportunity to say that we can do better. I believe that we can, and over the course of this debate, I hope to convince you of the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And then last, with the G in the alphabet, Alexis Gavanter.
Thank you, my voting power, Tony Turner, tonight's moderators, and the MVP team for organizing this candidate debate. This is an amazing turnout, and I am so happy to join you this evening. And hello to everybody joining us on Zoom. And thank you, Ryan and John. It is so nice to see you in person. So, voting is the foundation of our democracy, and an informed and engaged electorate is critical to the democratic process. Encouraging young voters to use their voices and the power of their vote to bring about positive change is key to seeing action on some of the most important issues facing us as a community, state, and nation. I am excited to hear what is on your minds and to let you get to know me and to share my ideas for Connecticut. How by focusing on public health and safety, prosperity, and progress, we can emerge from the pandemic even stronger. I am a business attorney, a gun violence prevention advocate, and a mom of 2 young boys.
5 seconds.
Oh, okay. I spent my life advocating for others by listening, bringing people together to find common ground, to create positive change, and I will bring the same approach to the state Senate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's begin now with our panel of millennial moderators with our first question coming from Susie Moore. Susie?
Hello. Our first question is, It is likely that the next state legislature will continue to review passing statewide laws that override local control. Do you agree or disagree with this trend, and why?
Okay, here all three candidates will be asked to answer that question. Once again, we'll begin alphabetical order. Mr. Blankley for 60 seconds.
I disagree with that, and I think you will find that all of us disagree with that. I have lived in this district for longer than my two opponents have even been alive, so I am well aware of what this community wants. It does not want to have laws imposed on it and rules imposed on it from Hartford. It is very important that we recognize some of the need that they are talking about, which is the need for affordable housing. But there are ways to accomplish this without having a mandate from the state. In particular, we should be looking at the Housing Trust Fund. And some of you, most of you must know, this is a fund that was set up in Stamford, and a fund is being set up in Greenwich. And there is every possibility that some portion of the American Rescue Package from Washington, some $40 million, may be available, or some portion of it anyway, to go into the trust fund, which will be very appropriate in terms of creating affordable housing in our community. But what we don't want is any imposition of rules from Hartford. As I'm sure many of you know, my
5 seconds.
daughter is in charge of planning and zoning in this town, and she stands full square against those potential impositions.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio.
John, you look and act a lot younger than you give yourself credit
Oh,
for.
well, thank you, Ryan.
So this was a major campaign issue last year, and I stood firmly against imposition of state control over local planning and zoning. And many Democrats in this county did the same. But when a bill came forward in the state Senate in order to overturn some local rights over planning and zoning, especially in dense areas, over accessory dwelling units and other matters, those same Senate Democrats voted in favor of reducing local rights over planning and zoning. And so it matters whether you have a consistent track record on this issue and whom you want to ally yourself with in Hartford. You know, just the other day, the mayor of Hartford, Connecticut, who has been one of the most vocal advocates for a state takeover of local planning and zoning rights, was down here to campaign for one of my opponents, Alexis. And so it does frighten me that if one of my two Democratic opponents were to win this race while local control over planning and zoning is on the ballot, that the Democratic leadership in Hartford will be emboldened to push even further against local rights over planning and zoning and schools and other issues.
Perfect timing. I was almost ready to call 5 seconds. And Ms. Gavanter.
Hi. I have been clear since the beginning of this campaign and really my whole life that I, of course, think whilst affordable housing is an important thing, we want our teachers to be able to live here, our firefighters, our police, our nurses. We want our children to afford to come back here after college, and we want our seniors to be able to retire here. Affordable housing is important, but I can't be more clear that I fully support and would fully advocate for local control and would oppose anything to the contrary. Now, I'm glad you brought up that Mayor Bronin came. I am honored that he came here in support of my campaign. He, as the mayor of Hartford, has been fighting a gun violence epidemic. I am a gun violence prevention leader. I'm the state chapter leader of Moms Demand Action, and I'm glad that he has seen that the work that we have done on a vast bipartisan basis again and again and again have kept our community safer, and that he is proud to endorse me. With that said, of course we don't agree on every issue. I think that this is what's unique about my candidacy. I am somebody that works with everybody. I listen, I find common ground, I build coalitions to create positive change. And so, my God, I don't know how we would get anything done in Hartford if we couldn't work together, just for example, on gun safety because we disagree on zoning. And that's going to be the truth on every single issue that I come to fight for in Hartford.
Okay, time. All right, our next question is from Peter Negria, from our panelist of moderators. Peter?
Hello. What has been the impact, if any, of the Police Accountability Bill, specifically in the 36th District? And do you think that impact has been largely positive or negative, and why?
we'll go in reverse just to mix it up a little. So Ms. Gavanter be first on that, please, and we'll go Fazio and then Blankley.
Sure. So the police accountability bill, I was just reading this morning that our police are engaging in de-escalation tactics and all sorts of other things. So I think it brought a lot of important issues to the forefront, which is a good thing. I have been a full and vocal supporter of fully funding our police. I think that's extremely important. Again, as the state chapter leader of Moms Demand Action, a gun violence prevention group, I have fought to make sure that we are keeping our communities, our schools, and our families safe. And I've done that by working with police. So, for example, there was a law just this past session, or 2 ago, I suppose, on safe storage of guns in cars. Now, as there's been a rise of car thefts, thank God that we have guns securely stored in their cars so that those guns can't be used in even further escalating crime. I've also worked with the police on gun safety education. I mean, our police are so important, and I would work with them every single day as a state senator, as I have as a leader in the gun violence prevention movement.
Okay, Mr. Fazio, same question.
When this debate came up last summer about policing in Connecticut, I was vocally against the police reform bill that was swept into law in the middle of the night in the summer of 2020. I warned, as did other candidates, that this would lead to a massive precipitation of more crime and violence, specifically in the most vulnerable neighborhoods in our state. What subsequently occurred is exactly that. In 2020, there was over a 30% increase in homicides in our state's biggest cities. In 2020, there was over a 40% increase in car thefts all across the state. Local police have been undermined and demoralized. That's why last year, Stamford and Greenwich's police unions took the historic move of endorsing my candidacy. And if I'm allowed to break some news tonight, they will also be announcing this week that they are supporting me once again. These are the exact people who risk their safety every day in order to keep illegal guns off the street, in order to prevent crime, in order to protect our most vulnerable citizens. I know them. They're good people, and we need to support them by repealing this awful bill as soon as possible.
Okay, Mr. Blankley, same question, 60 seconds.
The policeman's job is one of the hardest and most dangerous jobs there is. Just today, a police officer was killed outside the Pentagon, not by a gun, but by stabbing. It is one of the most difficult jobs you can imagine. My great-uncle was a policeman back home in the north of England, and I revered that man and the job he did. I want you to know that as a member of the BET, on which I served 2 terms, that is the Finance Board, I supported every police budget that came along, against, frankly, on one occasion, some Republicans who did not want to fund certain things that our police chief wanted to do. As far as accountability is concerned, it is in the law now, but I think it can be modified, and I think there's a way to do it without calling for total repeal, and that is to adopt the way that they've done it in Colorado, which is to say that employers will be liable for any infractions of civil rights that any police officer may inflict on anyone, but would exempt them, the police officers, from personal liability. I think this is a middle way to go. And incidentally, this is a way that I would intend to go with most policies as an independent. Ryan talks nicely about the 2 Democrats here. I'm still a registered Democrat, but I am an independent person and will bring an independent point of view when elected to our state Senate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are we allowed rebuttal?
On this round, no, but on the next round, yes. Yeah, good question. I want to get a question from each of our panelists, and then we'll do that. Our next question is from Lexi Bicuzzi. I want to call her Alexis as well. I'll get it straight. Lexi, go ahead, please.
So do you believe that our public school system is doing a great job, a fair job, or a poor job of educating the students in the 36th, and why? And please include specific problems or successes you have seen locally.
Ms. Gavanter.
That's a great question. Education is obviously one of the most important things that we can provide as a state. You know, Connecticut was just ranked as having the 2nd best schools in the country. And I think this is not only important to create opportunity for our children, but it's also going to be, it's an economic imperative to make sure that we continue to attract young families and businesses who, of course, want to be near where the young families are coming. So education is critically important. I think that we are doing a great job here in Greenwich, although, of course, and not just in Greenwich, but in Stamford and New Canaan, but more can be done. I think we need to invest in our infrastructure, make sure that our buildings are safe, and also improve our air quality. I was just reading today about issues potentially with some of the air quality in our building. So of course there's always more we can do. We need to be supporting our teachers and our students as we continue to navigate this pandemic. It's been really difficult, and I'm just really proud of the fact that our schools have mostly remained open.
5 seconds.
That's a big deal, and so I think that we're doing a great job, and we need to just continue to do so and improve and invest more where we can.
Mr. Fazio, same question.
I think that our schools do a very good job in this district. I think generally in Connecticut, the schools are good, but they should be great. In fact, they should be the best in the entire country, especially for all the money and resources that we pour into our schools. Connecticut spends the second most per capita, per pupil, of any state in the country on public education. Yet our test scores are slightly above average if you look at the nation's report card. I've spent most of my adult life advocating for education reform. I've spent 7 years tutoring in inner city schools in the Bronx. I'm a product of the public schools here in Greenwich. So I care a lot about this issue, and I think it's the ticket to upward mobility. So we need to have high standards across the board. We need to have high quality school choice for kids in failing schools. We need to support high quality alternative forms of education, including the Stamford Charter School for Excellence in Western Stamford, which has been undermined repeatedly by the State Board of Education. We need to reduce state mandates over local school districts. We need to have a high degree of ambition about the quality of education we provide to all kids in Connecticut.
Okay, and Mr. Blankley, 60 seconds.
One of the reasons that we chose Greenwich when we came to this country almost 40 years ago was because of the quality of schools, private schools and public schools in this district. My children were all educated here in a combination of the public and private schools, and my grandchildren, or two of them anyway, are now in one of the schools in North Miamis, where I may say there was a recent failure, which is an indictment of some of the infrastructure issues with regard to schools. But when it comes to particular buildings, I want to take credit for something, and that is, while again on the BET, I walked the talk. I was always supportive of school budgets and was always supportive, actually, of more spending on the schools than was often allowed by the BET. In particular, I don't know how many of you millennials from this town enjoyed the new auditorium at the high school, the musical instructional space and auditorium. Two people were credited by the chair of the Board of Ed when the auditorium was opened. One was the first selectman at the time, and the other was me, for certain political force that I applied at that time to get the appropriation done. So I walk the talk when it comes to education.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blankley. We're going to move into a little different phase next, and that is on our next round of questions. Not only will we have 60 seconds to answer the question, but any of your opponents may also rebut your answer, and then that candidate will be given an opportunity to respond to your rebuttal. So now that we've got a few questions under our belt the standard way, we're going to open it up for the rebuttal. And with that, our next question comes from Susie Moore.
The Greenwich Planning and Zoning Committee has decided not to allow the sale of cannabis. What are your thoughts on this?
Who wants that one first?
I'll take it. Go
okay,
on. Why not?
Mr. Blankley.
I have been in favor of the legalization of recreational marijuana, not because I'm not aware of potential physical harm that come from the use of this particular product, but because it is already out there. People use it already, and therefore, from the state's point of view, if we can regulate it, regulate the quality of it, regulate the distribution of it, and take taxes on it, then it seemed to me that on balance, that was the way to go. Now, if any particular municipality does not want to go there, then I have to respect their point of view. I personally would not oppose there being an outlet for this in our town. But let's face it, anybody who wants it can move elsewhere. Anybody in our state before the legalization could pop over the border to Massachusetts and get it there. So we have to face the reality of this particular product.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio?
If I am to cross the aisle with my Democrat friend, Mr. Blankley here, there are circumstances in which I would be in favor of a legalization regime in Connecticut. I'm very concerned that the bill that passed the state legislature in the past year was not a good one. It was full of pork, carve-outs, and the regulatory regime is probably not tight enough to keep for instance, marijuana out of the system of motorists, and it doesn't give police enough leeway in order to prosecute people who have been driving under the influence. I also support strongly the rights of municipalities, as I discussed before, to regulate it more tightly or ban the sale and distribution of it in their city. So it's something that I think is a totally fair decision by the town of Greenwich or any other town that would take that approach in Connecticut.
Okay, Ms. Gavanter.
I have to agree. I know this is very unpopular, but I do have concerns about the legalization of marijuana. I think it's absolutely fair to say if it's regulated that we're getting safer product. You know, there's a lot of concern about kids getting access to marijuana that then is laced with fentanyl. You know, I understand taxes are being, you know, lost to other states and that a lot of kids are getting it anyway, or people are getting it anyway. But I tend to always want to follow the science, and it does show that children's brains are developing up until they are 25 years old. And I do have real concerns about the normalization of marijuana once it's legal. It is legal, that's where we're at. As I said before, I believe in local control, and so I support the town of Greenwich in regulating those concerns. And I think that, to Ryan's point, I'm also very concerned about driving under the influence. And, you know, the police have said that they're going to have a really hard time, you know, being able to detect whether or not somebody's under the influence, in which case it also makes it harder to prosecute them. First and foremost, I think that we need to keep our communities safe. You know, that's my platform. You know, public safety and health, prosperity and
5
progress,
seconds.
and marijuana. And you know, obviously there's an element of prosperity there as well. But to me, the balance goes towards safety.
Okay, is there anyone that would like to rebut on this one? If so, you have 60 seconds, and the candidate that you would be speaking to in a rebuttal has 60 seconds to answer your rebuttal.
I'm not sure that they're rebuttals, but I will speak to points made by each of my opponents.
Okay, 60 seconds, Mr. Blankley.
First of all, on the imperfections of the bill, every bill that gets passed in any state at any time and at the federal level always has imperfections. There is one little known aspect of this most recent bill that people have not paid a lot of attention to, and that is the severe restriction on cigarette smoking. Now, you may think it's a bad thing to smoke cigarettes, and I happen to agree with that. At one time I did so, and I discovered that it was really bad for you. At one time I did smoke cannabis as a student.
Did you inhale, Mr. Blankley?
I certainly did. and it didn't do anything for me, to be quite honest. You know. So we must pay attention to other aspects of bills that get passed. That's one point. And the other point about the dangers of being impaired while driving, of course, I mean, that applies to alcohol. Trained officers in the state are more on the way trained to recognize when someone is impaired from smoking marijuana. It's very
5
different
seconds.
from the way that one detects alcohol, but trained officers are trained to do this.
Okay, so this entitles Mr. Fazio and Ms. Gavanter both 60 seconds each.
I'll let Mr. Blankley's testimonial and confessional stand on its own.
Same.
Okay, that one was easy. Our next question comes from Peter Negria of our millennial panelists. Peter?
Are there enough career-oriented, good-paying jobs for recent college graduates in the 36th District, given the cost of living here? If not, is this something that a legislator can address? And how would you promote employment opportunities specifically for this age group?
Okay, we're back to alphabetical. Mr. Blankley, please, 60 seconds.
I own a company based in the state, in Shelton. I started this company 20 years ago. It's an IT company. It has created dozens of jobs in our state. So I know about creating companies, I know about creating jobs, and I know about the education needed in order to take some of these jobs. You can't get employment in my company unless you have a degree in information technology. There are two great places for that in our state. One is Quinnipiac and the other is Fairfield U. And quite a number of our employees are from these universities. So it starts in terms of jobs, it starts with education. Education generally, of course, but I would say that there is something more specific we should be doing with regard to technical education. There are 17 technical colleges in our state, and they are not producing enough engineers and young qualified technical people for the jobs that are available, particularly at Electric Boat in Groton and New London. So job creation is important, and it starts with education. And by the way, we are hiring.
Okay. Mr. Fazio?
The state of Connecticut has utterly failed to create economic opportunity for all people, but especially young people and people looking to climb the first few rungs of life's ladder. Just the other week, we found out that Connecticut now has tied for the highest unemployment rate in the country. We have the fourth lowest rate of economic growth in the entire country over the last decade, in which time one party has held complete control of our state government. And they've used their power to raise your taxes over and over again to the point that Connecticut now has the second highest tax rate in the entire country. And for the next generation, we also have the second highest debt burden for you to pay. So this is the most important, probably chronic issue in Connecticut. And so we need an utter and clear and total change of direction in our economic policy in this state. Lower taxes on all families across the board. We need to improve regulations to reduce the cost of health care and electricity. We need to reform our state's unfunded debt and pension liabilities so that the next generation can afford to live here. This is the pressing and generational issue in Connecticut. And without change, without making a statement in this election, there will be no hope for the next generation in Connecticut. I believe if we do make that change, however, that the best days can still be ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beck.
So I agree with Ryan's assessment. I just think it's a bit outdated. Just recently, CNBC moved up Connecticut as one of the best states to do business from number 35 to number 25. And then when taking into account also best places to do business, period, looking into also the natural beauty of a place, the education, which goes to your question as well, it went up to top 10 in the country. And so, look, in just the past few months, we have brought in 4 large companies right into our district that brought in over 500 jobs. We are seeing office space through the roof in terms of the real estate boom there, with companies wanting to come in from Connecticut. And we are seeing young families coming from all over to Connecticut so that they can come and get these jobs. I agree, absolutely, there's more to be done, but we are on the right path. We must continue to lower taxes. We must consider repealing, including lower taxes, repealing the estate tax so we're not losing our seniors and that we're keeping our tax revenue base strong so that we can continue to do things like invest in education. Education, absolutely. We need an educated workforce, which actually we have, but we need to continue to do that. We've just passed debt-free community college in Connecticut, which is a huge deal. And then also in terms of investing in education, Ryan has voted just recently in support of a $3 million cut to our education.
Okay, your time is up.
Okay.
Okay, so do we have a rebuttal to any of this? So, Mr. Blankley, we started with you last
defer
time.
to my young friend.
Yes, I'm going to call on Mr. Fazio for the rebuttal, And then whoever he's rebutting, you have 60 seconds to respond as well. Ryan?
Okay, so first of all, I voted for 2 budgets on the RTM. The first one, in the worst pandemic in 100 years, increased the education budget by 1.1%, and the subsequent budget increased the education spend by over 5%. I believe in fully funding education in this town, and we have done exactly that. Second, I think we now have a clear difference between me and Mrs. Gavanter about the correct approach to economics in the state of Connecticut. She thinks that we are on the right path. She thinks that this is a this is a fertile ground for business creation. I think that's impossible to square with the fact that we now have tied for the highest unemployment rate in the country, and that we have the 4th lowest population growth in the country according to the U.S. Census, and that we have the 4th lowest rate of economic growth in the country according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. These are the facts. They're inescapable. They are indisputable. And quite frankly, I think if you think that's good enough, that you have an extremely low standard for the people of this district in this state. I know that we can do better. We have all the assets necessary to succeed fabulously. As Mrs. Gavanter said, great people, natural beauty, prime location. The only thing we're missing is the right leadership in Hartford. And that's why in this election, we need to send a message loud and clear that it's time for a change to our policies in Hartford.
Okay. Ms. Gavanter, do you want to answer that rebuttal?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then we'll go to Mr. Blankley.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So look, we are dealing with 40 years of mismanagement here in Connecticut. There's no question. That is why we've had underfunded pensions. That is why we had to have more taxes. However, to ignore the fact that Connecticut is in the middle of a huge turnaround is just frankly ridiculous. I think that the people in the 36th district can see, particularly even coming out of this pandemic, that we are having a flood of families moving here, bidding wars on our homes, and businesses escaping New York to come to Connecticut. We have a no tax increase balanced budget that passed with wide bipartisan support. So we don't need to send a message. We need to work together to continue to keep our taxes low and even lower them, to continue to pay down our debts, and to continue to then invest in things that are critical, like education. You know, during the pandemic, when teachers and students were struggling in order to keep our schools open and to continue to learn, often by hybrid and other remote options, I think that's when we needed to not looking into making cuts from what was already a proposed necessary budget.
And now Mr. Blankley.
I used to be employed by a large international company, and I was in charge of planning. One of the things you do in planning, you look at strengths and weaknesses and trends. And one of the trends that we've seen over the past dozen years is the trend away from employment in banking. We will never get back to the employment levels that we had in the capital industry that we had before 2008. It's just not going to happen. This has been one of the major drags. It is not because of tax policy. It is because of trends generally in the marketplace that we have to think about. So as a professional planner, this is something that you need to take account of. And let's just deal with this issue of lower taxes and less regulation. Let us face the fact that there is no possibility of reducing taxes in our state. I say in my palm card, which you can find outside, and I've said in my campaign and on my website, the best we can do is to hold the line on taxes. There is no possibility of reducing taxes. I'm going to put on my severest CFO face and tell you that it's just not possible. The numbers aren't there. And if I hear anything about 4 to 5 billion, or was it 5 to 6 billion, whatever it was that you said once, Ryan, in terms of tax carve-outs or whatever, they do not exist. As for regulation, it's an old Republican saw. In my business, there has been no regulation that has held me back. Quite the contrary. We have to comply with regulation. We are HIPAA compliant. We do a lot of work for doctors and hospitals.
Okay, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Blankley. Rebuttal, 60 seconds?
Yes, please. So if the second highest tax state in the country can't do anything ever to lower its taxes. What are the other 48 states below us so great at that we can't do in Connecticut? Again, I just have higher standards for the state of Connecticut, I think, than a lot of the Democratic candidates for office locally generally, not just on the dais here. And I just do not believe the marketing or the spin that's coming out of Hartford that we're hearing tonight about Connecticut being on the right path economically. It hasn't been for a long time. It still isn't on the right path. When I go up and down the business districts in Greenwich and elsewhere and talk to the small businesses, what they're telling me is it's impossible to hire people, even though we have the highest unemployment rate in the country. The cost of doing business is getting higher, that people who normally were their customers are moving out of the state, that demand is a major problem. Healthcare prices are going up and up. The cost of electricity is going up and up. This is not right. We can do so much better in Connecticut, but it's going to take a change in leadership first.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a question from the audience teed up? Yes. We do have okay. So now we're going to move to the second section of our debate, which is taking questions from both our Zoom audience as well as those of you in the room that have completed an index card and passed it over to the side. Who has the question? Susie, is that you?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
All right. So our first question is, what measures do you plan to implement to promote sustainability in our district?
Okay, Ms. Gavander, let's start with you and go the opposite direction.
Sure. So I think there's a number of measures that we need to be looking at. Sustainability and protecting our environment is critically important as we, continue to move into the next generation, and particularly as climate change is facing us. So the governor had looked into something called TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative. I think that's really interesting because it's working together with other states to consider how to combat climate change, and that's something that may or may not increase the gas price by 5 cents. But again, I think there's a lot of ways to be looking at that. Right now, there's no legislation, so that's something that you can kind of get in early to craft to be fair from a pricing perspective. Another thing that's interesting, we want to be promoting investment in our rail and in keeping our roads healthy and safe and to limit congestion. And so we're really lucky that right now we're about to receive a lot of money, hopefully from a federal, infrastructure bill. That's going to be a big deal to be investing in sustainability in terms of our roads, our rail, also encouraging battery charged cars. And so I think there's a lot of different things we need to look at. We also
5
need
seconds.
to be considering our air and water quality. Particularly in Stamford, there's issues about this with Aquarian. So I think that we need to be looking at it holistically, and we have a responsibility to be considering all options to make sure to protect our Earth.
Okay, Mr. Fazio?
We can protect our environment in this state without increasing the cost of living and destroying jobs in the process. The TCI is a new gas tax. It's already too expensive to live here, and I'm entirely opposed to it. I don't think a 5-cent increase in the cost of anything, 5% increase in the cost of anything in this state is tolerable at this point. I think the way forward is to look at some of our municipal leaders who have done a great job of being good stewards of the environment and extending that across the state. I see Fred Camillo in the background, our first selectman, and he's been a great champion of the environment and conservation. I sit on the First Selectman's Energy Efficiency Committee in town, and we're already starting to do good work about creating a blueprint for what it looks like to be good conservationists, improve your environmental footprint while also reducing costs and protecting the taxpayer. So things like that town hall that the town of Greenwich has already started to do before this energy committee was implemented, which is change all light bulbs to LED. That's significantly decrease the cost of electricity and also the cost of electricity and the environmental footprint of the town. I think we should also enable electric vehicles to be sold directly from the manufacturer to consumers.
5
More
seconds.
competition. That's something that has bipartisan support. So I'll be a pro-environment, pro-compromise. I think there's a better way forward than more costs on consumers.
Okay, Mr. Blankley.
Where to start on this? You should know that 40 years ago, I started a small company in the large company that I worked for, We looked at every kind of energy source other than oil and gas. We looked at wind, we looked at geothermal, we looked at wave and solar. And we started a solar company that became the largest solar company in Europe. When it comes to issues of sustainability, I walk the talk. I have been there and I have done that and I have succeeded, and I'm very proud of that. And that is the kind of thing that we should continue to be looking at in terms of innovation. Now we're going to be looking at wind power off the coast, further up in Connecticut, and there's a new wave power initiative off the Orkneys that I saw recently. So there is scope, very great deal of scope, for new kinds of sustainable development. But I want to talk about a major infrastructure project that I've been talking about that will reduce congestion and reduce pollution. And that is taking so much of the freight that is on our roads off the roads and take it by ship. It involves port development in Bridgeport, New London, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, all those trucks that come through our state bringing goods from
5 seconds.
from New Jersey up through the state. I intend to have them taken by sea. I can talk about this more later.
Okay. Is there a rebuttal to any of the answers so far? Ms. Cavanter.
I just want to reiterate that I think that climate change is an existential crisis and that it's irresponsible not to look at all options, including working with other states and thinking about big ideas to combat it. I think that this is a once in a generation type of issues, and we need to be open-minded and creative and thinking about working together to find a solution to that problem.
That has earned Mr. Blankley and Mr. Fazio 60 seconds each if they desire it. Mr. Blankley?
This is one of the ways in which an independent senator will be able to make a difference. I agree with some parts of what Ms. Gavanta says. I agree with some parts of what Mr. Fazio says. But let me talk about something that I disagree with him on, and that is the Transportation Climate Initiative. I started this evening in my 1-minute introduction by talking about the things that are important to millennials. It is the state of the world, what we have been doing in our generation to the world. It is outrageous. We have now the opportunity through the TCI to act in conjunction with other states. And this is a situation where we do need to act cooperatively with other states. And I agree with Ms. Gavanta on this point.
5 seconds.
It is a regional matter. 5 cents is nothing. The price of gas fluctuates by $1 over the past year. We would never see the 5 cents, but we will see the reduction in carbon, and we will, through that means, improve our climate.
Mr. Fazio, 60
What
seconds.
other states would we be collaborating with in the TCI? All but one state has pulled out of it already. So it's not a regional solution. It's just a tax imposition on the middle class in Connecticut. Listen, the way to actually solve climate change is through rapid technological development and improvement. And I'm very glad to see that in recent decades we've seen the cost of generating solar and wind fall precipitously, improvements in battery technology, improvements in electric vehicle technology. I think we have to embrace those. But I also think we have to be very careful at examining what the cost on the middle class and the working class will be. I think it's very important upon all of us to consider the plight of the people who are the least fortunate. And all of these taxes that my opponents are talking about, TCI, gas tax, whatever, they're regressive. And we need no more regressive taxes in a state where poverty has increased over the last 30 years.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move now to the final stage of section 2, which is taking one more question from the audience, meaning either an index card that has been turned in here, or the QR code with the Google form, or coming in over a laptop from our 400 or so Zoom watchers. And once we have that question, then we'll move into our third and final section of the debate, where our candidates will be able to ask each other questions. Okay. So, who has the next question from the audience? Peter?
The previous state senators for the 36th district have either been strong proponents or strong opponents of tolls. What is your position on tolls, and how will it affect younger residents of the 36th district?
Mr. Blankley.
I spoke the RTM 2 years ago, I think it was, in opposition to tolls. My opposition came from two sources. One was that it is a regressive tax, and I'm very pleased to see that Mr. Fazio agrees with me that regressive taxes are not good. I disagree with him as far as TCI is concerned. It's not regressive. However, tolling is a regressive tax. Tolling is something that would be an imposition on the middle class in our state. I know all the stories about taxing, all the traffic that comes through and what happens in other states and so on and so forth. But when I spoke to the RTM, I said, first of all, it's regressive, and second of all, take my company, based in Shelton. I have over 40 employees. Half of them are out on the road at any one time. This will be a severe imposition on companies who need to send their engineers out and meet and deal with customers, as we do in my business. So I have been opposed to tolls. I think, however, I can accept the tolls that are, well, not the tolls, but the imposition now on trucks going through our state, though I believe there are still some legal impediments with that. But I come back to my infrastructure plan, which will be to take trucks off the roads entirely and take the whole thing off and into ships so that freight goes by sea.
So I've long been on the record against tolls. I think it's an unreasonable tax on the middle class and the working class in this state. As Mr. Blankley said, I am happy that both Ms. Gavanter and Mr. Blankley will say tonight that they're against tolls. I am, however, unhappy that they say that they're for a new gas tax in the TCI, and that'll have a very similar, if not the same effect on middle class residents of our district. In this state, we do not have a spending problem in our revenue problem in our transportation fund. We have a spending problem. According to the National Association of State Budget Offices, we spend the most per capita on transportation of any state in the continental U.S. The problem is that we spend it so inefficiently and that we spend it on projects that look better for politicians than they do to help regular residents in our state. So while we've spent billions and billions of dollars on upstate projects that are subsidized in their operating costs tens of millions of dollars a year, in the case of the Hartford rail line, it actually equates to over $140 for every single ride in taxpayer subsidy. It's insane. Meanwhile, the vital infrastructure downstate, like Metro North and I-95, go neglected. The speed of the trains slow down on Metro North.
5 seconds.
The traffic gets worse and worse down here. We need to focus our funding that is plentiful on vital infrastructure in this part of the state.
Okay, Ms. Gavanter.
I also oppose tolls. I think that what we need to create is a stable environment for businesses to come in. And they're encouraged to come in when they find the business environment and the financial environment predictable. So, of course, one of my top priorities is to be continuing to bring businesses to Connecticut so that we can create jobs. And so I do oppose tolls. With that said, I agree. We need to be investing in our infrastructure. I will be a vocal advocate for making sure that we bring as many dollars down here to our district to invest in rail and in our roads. We are the place in the state that needs it most. And so, that includes also addressing, as we do continue to work on our infrastructure projects, particularly a new I-95, making sure we're considering state-of-the-art technology, such as quiet pavement technology, considering when we're fixing our bridges that they are safe and that, again, they are less noisy. I think people in our district are keenly aware of how much that impacts our quality of life. And so I'd really want to have an intense focus on that. In addition
5
to
seconds.
improving our rail, because once again, access to New York and to Stamford and all of our cultural centers is a big reason why people move here. And so I just want to make sure that we get as many
Okay.
transportation dollars here as possible.
Time. You have a rebuttal?
I just want to make a quick comment.
Rebuttal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to echo Mrs. Gavanter's call to study quiet pavement and quiet joint technology on bridges locally, potentially to reduce noise pollution on 95 for some of our downtown residents.
Okay, thank you. Our team of millennials have signaled that they would like to ask one more question that comes from the audience. You can tell who's really in charge here tonight, right? So Lexi, you have that final question of section 2 of our debate. Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask, what are your views on implementing critical race theory into our curriculum in our community's public schools?
Ms. Gavanter, let's start with you and go the opposite direction.
So I absolutely oppose critical race theory being in our public schools. And I support local control over our local curriculums, no question. As a mom, I feel really strongly that we need age-appropriate and apolitical education in our schools, period, end of sentence. With that said, I haven't heard of any critical race theory being pushed into our public schools. And I've been asking around because I'm hearing parental concerns. And I understand that as a mom. We need to know what's being taught in our schools. But it seems to be a bit of a distraction from what is actually a concern, which is investing in our education. And again, if I just haven't heard no movement or efforts anywhere to introduce critical race theory into our schools.
Okay. Mr. Fazio.
I oppose critical race theory in our schools, absolutely. I think it's a neo-Marxist piece of propaganda. I think that there's a twofold question in this debate, both what we're teaching our kids in schools and what we're not teaching our kids in schools. So what we're not teaching our kids in schools is the actual truth and facts about our system of government and our nation's history. There was a study a few years back that found that less than 20% of Americans under the age of 40 could pass a citizenship exam. Basic facts about our country. It's a lot easier to hate our country when you don't know the truth about our country. We don't need to teach politics one way or the other, left or right in our country. We just need to teach the facts to prepare young Americans for citizenship later in life. So as your state senator, I would propose a standard that in order to pass a civics requirement in our nation's high schools, that all kids in Connecticut should have to pass a citizenship exam or something of the like, the basic facts. That will also crowd out any effort to teach politics in our state's classrooms. I think that there is a reasonable way forward, and I hope that I can create some bipartisan consensus on this matter.
Okay. And Mr. Blankley, 60 seconds.
Well, I studied history at Oxford. And one of the, and that's important because it was very critical, to use an apposite word, to get the facts right. You should not believe, for example, what Mr. Shakespeare said about Richard III. He wasn't a hunchback, you know. He did that in order to please the Tudors. So history gets written in every generation, gets updated by every generation, and is changed in every generation. History isn't factual per se. It is an ongoing stream of thought, new fact, and new interpretation. Now, as far as this particular question is concerned, critical race theory is not taught in our schools. It's a graduate level course, and the whole purpose of it was to bring to light aspects of the history of the country that had not been known before. And quite honestly, if you look at the Tulsa Massacre in 1921, the year when my mother was born, incidentally, who knew about it? I didn't know about it. It's very important that that is a factual matter and should be taught as part of history. And when it comes to citizenship, I passed the citizenship exam. I want you to know that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move now to the third section of our debate, which is the opportunity for the candidates to ask each other questions. Just a friendly reminder on the time allotment. When you ask one of your opponents a question, you have up to 60 seconds to ask the question. The opponent you're asking the question of has 90 seconds to respond. You then have 30 seconds as a follow-up if you desire to have a follow-up question. And then the candidate, again, to whom you're asking the question has 90 seconds. So that is the way the time allotment will go for our third and final section. Mr. Fazio, you have not had the opportunity to be first yet, so I'm going to call on you to be first to ask your question of either of the two candidates or both.
Okay. Mrs. Gavanter, we learned a little bit about your bio in our Joe Kelly radio show, and you have an interesting bio. You said you lived many years in San Francisco and New York before moving to Connecticut, and I wondered if there were any public policies in those cities that you would recommend Connecticut consider implementing in our state.
Well, I would say you just misstated what I said in the Joe Kelly interview, but that's okay. So I was in New York where my husband was working in Greenwich, right across the street, still is, when we were transferred to San Francisco for a couple of years to help grow their office out there. And so I was a lawyer at the time and was bi-coastal. So I would go, as you're right, back and forth between New York and San Francisco for a couple of years. And the deal was that once we had children, we'd be allowed to settle in Greenwich, which I am very happy. Obviously, that's why I'm here today. We were able to do. So look, I am, I think, really grateful for the fact that I was able to live in other places in the country and able to represent businesses throughout the country. What I did as a labor and employment attorney and a business attorney is I helped companies navigate complex regulatory environments all over so they could expand, bring up jobs, and institute fair employment practices for, for example, fair wages, paid family leave, non-discrimination. This is what I did and worked across the country. So as far as what I'd want to bring here, I think, again, the idea of a pro-business environment is something that, as I brought businesses across the entire country, is something that I think is really important. And so, again, that has informed my ideas about having lower taxes in order to bring companies to Connecticut.
Mr. Fazio, do you have a 30-second follow-up, or you want to move to your next question?
No, I can ask John his question
Okay,
now.
move to your next question. Great.
John, you have been a prominent Democratic campaigner in the town of Greenwich for years, and I wanted to know what was, in the many campaigns you ran, what was the favorite liberal or progressive cause that you fought for in your career?
Well, that's an interesting question. Thank you, Ryan. My favorite, I think, would be gun control. Actually, this started way back. In the 1990s, there was a terrible massacre of school children at a place called Dunblane in Scotland, which happens to be just around the corner from where half of me, my mother, comes from. When something like that happens very close to you, then you become very, very aware of the matter. Then we had Newtown, and then many, many gun incidents in our country. When I came here, America is such a wonderful place, but there is one aspect of it that was always troubling, and that was the matter of gun control. So from the beginning, I have advocated for better means of making sure that guns are kept out of the hands of people who should not have them. I spoke to our last governor 2 or 3 years ago, and at that time, I think the number was something like 2,000 gun permits had been refused. He said he had no way of judging how many people had been saved as a result of that, but he just knew in his heart, and everybody, I think, would agree and hope and agree with that, that lives were probably saved as a result of the laws that were put in place after Newtown. So it is a progressive issue, and it's one that I have thought about and advocated for in all the campaigns that I have run, actually, in the past 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yep. Alexis, would you like to ask your questions now of either of your opponents?
Sure. John, what would be your top priority in the state Senate?
Number one is the infrastructure investment that I spoke about before. There are a couple of aspects to this. I've had a business career, as you all know, and I'm portraying myself as a businessman who wants to go to Hartford and introduce some proper business thinking up there. But it's also been a successful business career at the top level in major corporations, handling major projects, $100+ million projects, and understanding those projects, how they are, analyzing them, and so forth, is going to be a key component of handling the billions, possibly, of infrastructure dollars that are going to come into our state. So a state senator needs to understand that whole business, needs to understand how money gets spent, and I would make that certainly a priority. But above all, it would be to direct some of those dollars to port development, so that, and some of you have heard this before, so-called roll-on, roll-off vessels are ships that trucks can go onto, containers can go onto at one port, they will be transported by sea and will be offloaded at another port. The impact on I-95 and I-84 will be stupendous in terms of taking trucks off the road. It will reduce congestion, a major drag on our state's economy, and it will reduce pollution. So that will be my main priority. Thank you for the question.
Good. And you have another question?
Sure.
Okay.
Ryan, you have written that you found both Roe versus Wade and the same-sex marriage law, ruling, I should say, offensive to the rule of law. And I was just wondering if you still feel that way, and if so, if you can explain why.
So the quote is taken out of context from a 2,000-word essay I wrote on Federalist number 74, which is Alexander Hamilton's essay on judicial independence. And certainly, I didn't mean to touch on the underlying public policy issue. For instance, I've spoken out in favor of equal rights under the law and gay marriage and so on and so forth. The underlying question of the public policy is that abortion and gay marriage are protected in law at the federal level and at the state level, and neither of those things are going to change under any circumstances. What this race, I believe, is about how our state senator can effectuate positive change on the public policy issues that are subject to change and up for debate in our state's government. And none of these social issues are ones that are subject to change. They're already codified into law. So we have to ask ourselves in this debate, how are we going to make it easier to raise a family in this state? How are we going to increase healthcare access? How are we going to reduce the cost of living? How are we going to improve our schools? These are all the subjects that are up for debate. And I think engaging in national debates or other areas where all public policy really is settled in Connecticut is probably not productive.
Can I respond?
You may.
Thanks.
Yeah.
60
60-second rebuttal.
Sure. I would just take issue with the fact that while those should be settled law, that they are, and that they're not being impacted at the state levels across the country. State legislators across the country have been passing laws to try to limit both, or particularly a women's right to choose. And I think that it's really important that we stay vigilant in protecting that in Connecticut, and also to protect LGBTQ rights. So I guess I disagree while the Supreme Court has ruled that way. As we all know, the Supreme Court is changing, and I don't find this to be an issue of nationalization. I think that this is very much coming down to the states as we're seeing across the country, but we can agree.
Yeah,
to disagree.
I understand that point of view. I would just say that in Connecticut, it is ironclad. There's certainly no appetite among Republicans or Democrats in the state legislature to change the underlying policy on any of those issues, even if they weren't protected by both state and federal law. So in Connecticut, I think it's very clear these policy matters are not changing.
Okay, and now, Mr. Blankley, you have the opportunity to ask questions of your opponent. And after we have answers and any rebuttal, then we'll move right into our 2-minute closing remarks by all the candidates.
So my first question is for Mr. Fazio. Mr. Fazio, in order to succeed in your campaign pledge to balance the budget, get unfunded pension costs in line, and do so while lowering taxes, you have to know budgeting. I've managed budgets many times the size of the budget of the state of Connecticut. I provided a comprehensive pension plan restructuring when I was candidate for state treasurer, and managed a budget for my company in Shelton. Can you tell us your specific experience in budgeting and how you will bring this skill to achieving your promises?
Absolutely, John. So I dealt most of my career in very, very low margin, large volume commodities businesses. Energy, agriculture, shipping. We'd have to price multi-million-dollar projects and execute multi-million-dollar projects every day, really. And the margin was so low on these transactions that if you did not budget the costs, the financial costs, the logistical costs, the physical risk, that you would lose your shirt. It was not a matter of losing a little or gaining a little. It was a matter of winning a little or losing a whole lot. And so I've done these multi-million-dollar projects, across the last decade, whether it was corporate transactions or shipping transactions or energy or agriculture. So I am confident in my financial and budgeting background. And as to the specific state questions, just like in private business, you're never going to solve these budgetary questions unless you know the specifics, unless you know the facts cold. And I believe that I have good exposure to the state's budget questions. I know how we could deliver an income tax cut across the board by finding tax expenditures to eliminate to help finance it, as well as finding waste in the state budget, reducing debt finance spending, and doing reforms that could be legally upheld in court to our existing obligations on the state level in order to help get our budget into balance. I'm very confident about my ability on all these fronts.
Mr. Blankley, if you desire a 30-second follow-up.
I do indeed. Mr. Fazio, I'll give you a challenge. Before our next debate, if you can come up with at least $1 billion in terms of the tax carve-outs that you talk about at the state level, which would finance in some way lower taxes, then I will...
I could do it now.
Do it. I want to hear next Friday. I want to hear next Friday, and I will be giving you the hard CFO look when I do so. And if you succeed in that,
you do get 90 seconds.
Can I do it now? Okay.
Respond.
There's tax exemptions for buying and selling boats for any number of machinery in manufacturing. There's tax exemptions for data purchases and the data business in the tax code. Again, the Office of Fiscal Analysis releases a report on tax expenditures. It's anywhere from $5 to $6 billion, depending on whether you count it in dynamic or static terms, meaning if you raised it, would you be reducing economic growth, so you're losing out on some of the revenue. And my plan basically for financing an across-the-board, fair, progressive income tax cut would be for people to get around the table, look at this report, and prioritize the tax expenditures and carve-outs, which are the least productive for our state's economy, and everyone to agree. And that's the way I think you deliver a pro-growth, pro-middle-class income tax reform for everyone.
do I get 30 seconds on that?
You do not.
Oh.
You now get your second question
We can pick it up.
to ask Ms.
We'll
Gavanter
pick it up on Friday.
if you choose.
So this question is for Ms. Gavanter. So in your Greenwich Time profile, you said, we want this to be a multi-generational community where our teachers can live, where our police can live, where our nurses can live. There are over 2,000 teachers who work in our district and almost 500 police officers, very few of whom, in either case, live in the district. Can you tell me what you mean by that, given that they cannot afford to live here on salaries that are far from allowing them to afford a typical house in Greenwich?
You have 90 seconds.
Sure. I think this touches on exactly what we were talking about earlier. I think that having our local government continue to work on these creative solutions to create more affordable housing, and that's housing at, a bunch of different price points, is critically important. And I think that they're making a lot of great headway. We talked about the Housing Trust Fund. We've talked about, there's something like Greenwich Connections, New Canaan's doing something similar. So I think that we need to be really encouraging this, and I think that we need also, the state senators in Hartford need to be champions for helping them to continue to fund these creative solutions. So it's a mix of local control, but then also support where necessary, because it is really important to have our teachers here, to have our firefighters here, our police, to have them continue to invest in our local businesses, to be shopping here, to be, part of the fabric of our community. I think that that's a value that we all share, and that we could all agree on here, and that's something I would be really focused on.
Okay. Mr. Blankley, 30 seconds as a follow-up.
Aspiration is one thing, executing is another. I hear no way from what you just said that what you aspire to can be achieved.
Okay, 90 seconds if you like.
I think we're achieving it right here in Greenwich right now. And I think as your daughter is on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I'm hearing so many exciting ideas coming out of there to create more affordable housing while maintaining our architectural integrity. And so I want to continue to be brainstorming, working together to continue on that path.
Okay.
It's not happening at the scale that would be required to enable teachers, policemen, and nurses who work in our town to acquire property in our town.
Okay, point made. Let's move now into the final section of our debate, which is the 2-minute closing remarks. Ms. Gavanter, let's start with you.
Sure. This has been a great evening, and I just want to thank everybody who joined, the MVP team, everybody here in the audience and on Zoom, and Ryan and John. It's been really great to exchange ideas. And of course, listening and working together to get things done is what I'm all about. And so listening to what the concerns are of the millennials, of which I think I'm the oldest age of, then is always a good thing. So, I want to use this skill set, to focus on public safety, which includes public health, emerging from this pandemic stronger than ever, and also includes continuing to focus on gun violence prevention and supporting our police officers and our firefighters. I want to focus on prosperity, which, as we've talked about extensively today, is about lowering taxes and bringing jobs into our community and also investing in our education. And then, of course, progress. So that includes not only protecting our environment, which we've talked about, but also protecting and expanding voting rights, which is something that's critically important. Expanding women's rights, ensuring equality. These are things that I would remain vigilant about and focused on. And so, again, I thank you for your time, and I'm excited to continue this conversation on Friday.
Okay. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you to MVP for hosting tonight's debate. Thank you to my fellow millennial, Alexis, and my fellow millennial at heart, John, for their interesting discussion with us tonight. The eyes of Connecticut voters are on Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan for the next 2 weeks. They're on us to render a verdict as to whether the status quo is acceptable in our state or whether we can do better. Is it acceptable that Connecticut now has, tied for the highest unemployment rate in the country, the second highest taxes, and the second highest debt burden to boot? Is it acceptable that our homicide rate rose over 30% last year and car thefts rose over 40% in 2020? Is it acceptable that the state government continues to restrict our personal freedoms and undermine local control of town planning and zoning? Is it acceptable that one party has had complete control for the past 12 years and there's so little compromise and bipartisanship in our state? If someone wanted to hand Democratic leaders in the Senate a supermajority with this special election to advance a statewide property tax, more state control, more unsafe policing policies, I understand why you would vote for a Democratic candidate. But if you believe we can do better, I would like to offer a different suggestion. I know we can do better because I know the character of this community. So let's bring people together from across the aisle to cut taxes, reduce the cost of healthcare and electricity. Let's support our local police and reduce crime. Let's protect personal freedoms and local control over our schools and town planning and zoning. Let's bring everyone together from across our community. So on August 17th, I kindly ask for your confidence to serve you in our state Senate so we can create a brighter future for everyone in our state.
Okay. And Mr. Blankley, 2 minutes.
I love the aspiration that I hear from my two opponents. I too aspire to have better education, proper policing, climate control, and all the other issues that you advocate for. However, what we need to concentrate on is economic growth in our state. If you talk about unfunded pension liabilities, if you talk about the huge debt overhang, as you have, Ryan, it is something that cannot be solved overnight. This is the kind of thing that is going to take us years to work our way out from under. And the best way to do that is to elect an independent senator who will go up to Hartford, an independent senator with business background at the corporate level, business background in terms of creating jobs as an entrepreneur in our state, and someone who has had government experience, working with the police, working with schools, and advocating for them and passing budgets in their favor. It is most important to think about my main project, my main priority, which will solve so many of our issues. People don't go around on a daily basis thinking, oh my goodness, we have all this unfunded pension liability. Nobody thinks about that on a daily basis, but everybody thinks about the congestion on the roads. Everybody thinks about pollution. These are things that are in our face. These are things that we can do something about. And I ask for your vote so that I can go to Hartford and do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blanford. I got a couple of remarks. One remark would be when the idea was first put forward of allowing the candidates to ask each other questions, that raised a lot of eyebrows. But these candidates tonight have proven to be of very high caliber. They kept it fair, they kept it civil, and I want to tip my hat to all three of them. And let's give them a round of applause for that. Job well done. Secondly, my remarks would be about the millennial panel. First of all, Tulsi, can you stand up? You haven't been up in the bright lights here. Tulsi Sundaresh. You've met our other panelists, Susie, Peter, and Lexi. I cannot tell you what a joy it has been to work with them to pull this off, if I could use the words. They also are a very high caliber group. These are our future leaders. The people that you see around the room are our next U.S. Senator, our next first select person, and so forth. So join me in giving these guys a round of applause for pulling this together today. And to wrap up, thank you to the press for being here, Greenwich Sentinel for being our primary media sponsor, and I do want to recognize Mr. First Selectman Fred Camillo. Fred, thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate that. And millennials appreciate that. Okay, on behalf of My Voting Power Greenwich, we're concluded. Thank you for attending.